Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country and around the globe, shit's getting real out there. And I am coming to you wearing a helmet, a very special helmet. I'm going to take it off. I'm taking off the helmet now. But we have an important guest who can get us through these perilous times as we all await the results of the election. By the time this drops, we may have more. I want to break it down with somebody that I think is a person of the moment, an important leader, somebody I really admire and look to for guidance and information that I think you can right now as well. The great and powerful Molly Mckew joins us.
Woo! I feel like I should have the Wizard of Oz head like flashing in front of me, but alas not.
You should. If anybody did. So I started the interview. I don't know if people could even hear me. I started the interview with a Halo Master Chief helmet on. That was my Halloween costume.
Amazing.
It's also, I think we all are kind of wearing a helmet right now to wait and see what happens. We're all in this like dystopian future. And you are a person who navigates this wild and weird new frontier, and especially the technology frontier. So I thought this would be an appropriate way to start our conversation. I hope you don't mind.
It's awesome. Have you gotten any of the social media ads yet for like the weird like personal breathing system helmet that instead of wearing this mask that's not really doing anything, you can wear like a neoprene head with a face shield built in and like air filters on the side. And I'm just like, that's not the stupidest thing, but it looks so crazy.
But a Halo Master Chief helmet looks pretty cool.
But that's the thing is if they looked more like a motorcycle helmet, we'd all be like, yeah, I'm wearing that. Like, I'm not getting COVID now. But unless, it's these like very spacey, like, no.
Well, I'm so glad you're with us right now. As we record this, we're recording this late morning East Coast on Thursday. It'll drop Thursday night. Election results continue to pour in. We're still waiting on a couple key states. A winner has not been declared. But this conversation will endure no matter who is announced as the winner and no matter how that goes. I look at this conversation a lot like the one I had with Malcolm Nance a couple of weeks ago, where I want to be predictive. I want to go beneath the hood, show people what they're not seeing, and then also maybe give them some guidance going forward. So I'm going to get into that. I'm going to talk about Russian attacks. I'm going to talk about cyber warfare. I'm going to talk about what's happening all around us right now. But first, Molly Mckew, you're one of the more interesting people that I know from the Twitter sphere. I don't think we've ever met in person, have we?
No, I don't think so.
We're like virtual friends. And
we probably like walked past each other in a congressional hallway when you were still lobbying for veterans. But but I don't think we've ever actually met. No.
We have a lot of friends in common. I know General Hertling, who's joined us on the show, is a friend of yours. But let me start out by asking you, Molly Mckew, where are you? And because you were one person, I didn't know where you were going to be. You might be in Russia, you might be in Georgia, you might be somewhere in an undisclosed location. And how are you? How have you been handling this pandemic, you and the people close to you?
I'm in Washington, D.C., and I guess technically home, but usually this is where my cats live, and I come to visit them every now and then. I'm normally out, as you point to, sort of roaming around the edges of Russia and the Baltics and sort of parts there around. But I haven't been anywhere in a real damn long time. And I think this is actually the longest, by far, that I haven't been on an airplane since high school. And it's just starting to get very, like, where am I going? I need to get out of here. I need to get out of this place now. But it's just weird because, I love my country very much. But the work that I do, America is really far from everything, and you need to be out there, like talking to the people that are doing the things, who are on the front lines, who see things much more clearly in many respects. And right now, everybody's just sort of looking over at us like, and you're like, I know, I'm sorry, we'll get it right. And they're like,
for people listening, what you're doing is shaking your head. You're shaking your head, right?
They're just this like sad, like, we don't know what happened to you, but don't bring your COVID cooties over here, head shake. And it's really weird. Like this whole time is really weird. And it's just, there's so much just rapidly shifting everywhere in the world that we're not paying any attention to, because we're like, what county in Pennsylvania hasn't been recounted yet? But there's just a lot going on. So I'm doing my best to keep track. I'm physically fine, obviously. One of my nutty neighbors has, contracted COVID and spread it to zillions of people. So we're like, completely ostracizing him. But I'm fine. My family is fine. My adorable niece and nephew, who I cherish more than anything, are fine and struggling in this world of being a young kid trying to figure out how to do school through screens and masks and everything else. But and my dad is out in Idaho in the mountains, like trying not to feel super isolated and alone. But I think, we're all doing okay. It's been a weird year, and no weirder for us than anybody else. We're fortunate to be able to sort of power through and sit in our little dark corners and write things and whatever else. But yeah, it's weird. I'm really sick of DC, tired of being in DC, really tired of it.
I don't blame you. I like one of my greatest fears, other than being like locked in like a rubber room forever, or a cell of some kind, right? That's one of my greatest fears. But my other one would be being trapped in Washington, D.C., which is not dissimilar. But I want to ask you, you do have a very cool background. I ask everybody about their background, where they are. If folks are listening and want to watch, you can go to angryamericans.us, go to our Facebook page. But tell me about what looks like a sword behind you over alcoholic beverages of some kind.
Yeah, there's a pile of like whatever liquor bottles people have left here that I don't have room for in the whiskey cabinet, which is right behind me. I have a like authentic Japanese sword that was a gift from my father when I was in high school, sort of as a joke, but sort of not. And over the years, every time he comes, he'll like get it off the wall and pull it out and make sure I'm keeping it sharp. And he's like, well, you never know when the zombies are going to come. And he like really believes that to some respect. He's always been a prepper. Like he really embraced the Idaho mentality when we moved there of prepping for Red Dawn, basically. But you have to have your hand-to-hand weapons, your guns, everything else. But I love that sword, and it sort of traveled around with me. Like I think it was at college with me. I didn't take it to the UK when I was in grad school, obviously, but it's been with me ever since. And I can do basics with it. I'm not necessarily a sword wizard, but I'm glad that I have it. And every time my niece and nephew come over, it's of course the first thing they do is like grab it and pull it out. And you're like, no, it's real.
So that's me. So that's me. I'm like your niece and nephew. But I also
who isn't?
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you also. So it sits over some alcoholic beverages. You've been all over the world. You must have experienced some incredible libations and food all around the world in your incredible travels. But Molly Mckew, what is your favorite drink of choice?
My go-to, I'm an Irish whiskey drinker, is really Jameson, because you can find Jameson anywhere. Anywhere in the world you go, there's Jameson. It might be like a dusty bottle sort of tucked in the back underneath something, but they have it. It's the same with Guinness. Like when I was working in Africa, Guinness, the Irish are really smart. They like colonized the port towns of Africa with Guinness breweries very early. So no matter where you go, there's like the African version of Guinness Extra Stout, which is like this kind of sweet, molassesy, delicious, made to be drunk, warm beer. But between Guinness and Jameson, you can go anywhere and like your drink will be there waiting for you. So those are the things I drink.
That's amazing. I wanna ask you about those travels and your perspective on everything that's happening. But this is Angry Americans, and I ask everybody a couple of key questions, whether it was Ambassador Susan Rice or Sarah Jessica Parker or our friend Mark Hertling. And so I'll ask you now, Molly Mckew, when you were growing up, what was your first car?
My first car the car that I inherited was this 1981 Subaru station wagon, like the old hatchback, the seats fold down. I think most of our childhood, the seats were folded down because there were not seatbelt laws in Idaho, and it was way more fun to be like running around in the back with your sister than it was to be sitting in a seat. But we had this, it was the car we bought when my family moved to Idaho when I was very young. I was like 2 years old when we moved out there. And that was the car that sort of took us across the Mountain West for all of our road trips and all of our childhood. And then when we moved back east, sort of right before high school, my mom and my sister and I just spent the entire summer kind of driving around the country in this station wagon with like a dog, 2 gerbils in a cage, like all of our shit just like piled inside of it and strapped to the roof, and occasionally like flying out the side of the suitcase, National Lampoon style as we tore down the highways. But this was really pre-internet, right? So you had like the triptychs from AAA and like a big road atlas, and you'd be like, I don't know, let's stop at this place, and you'd wake up next to the Hoover Dam, and you had no idea how you got there. But it was such a great summer, and that car was just like the most beloved thing of me and my sister. We loved that car. And so it was the car that she first drove and that I then inherited, and it made it all the way through, I think, essentially when I finished grad school, and then it was just the road salt in Ohio like gutted it out from the inside, and finally it was recycled, but all of us cried a lot. I loved that car. I wrote my college admissions essay on that car.
Really? About that car, or like while leaning on the car? Like...
No, about the car and like what the car was for us, because it had been this like, you know, the vehicle that carried us from one point to another in our lives for so long. But I love that car. I still do.
Molly, did the car have a name, and what color was it?
We just called it Subi because we were little kids when we got the Subaru. It was like this pale, it was blue, but it was like a pale blue, like a Mountain West tearing through the mountain snow blue. But it was, you know, a 1980 car. So power nothing, right? Like, you know, when you're steering, of course, stick shift, you know, it was like the massive, like, I got it, don't worry, it's in gear. You could never really tell if it was in reverse until you press down on the pedals. It only had the one side mirror because two weren't mandated by law yet. But I love that car. It got infinity gas miles per gallon. I think the entire time I was in high school, I only filled it up once. Like it was an amazing car. I loved that car.
I love it.
And it had those old vinyl seats. So in the summer you would sit down and it was like, oh! But
that's how we all feel right now. Oh, right? We all
we're all sitting on the hot seats. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we need guidance. And if this episode is going to be like us rolling across the world in that Subaru with you guiding us with your extensive education and experience and that samurai sword, you know,
with the sword
in front. You are, you know, one of the most trusted experts on cyber attacks, on information warfare, on the Russians in particular. Anybody who's knowledgeable in the space follows you on Twitter. You're one of my favorite people to follow there. So I want to ask you, you know, what's happening around us. But even when we started this conversation, we were kind of joking about Zoom, and you said how you use Zoom. So let's talk about Zoom as one vulnerability. Because I want to give people some information about what's happening at the government level, but also what they can do at a personal level. But talk to us about Zoom.
Well, I mean, I know that we've all embraced Zoom since March because we have no real options when it comes to living through our screens. I delete it every time I finish using it. I don't know what it's doing exactly, but I think it is definitely feeding into a giant, vast Chinese facial recognition software somewhere. And it just doesn't need to listen to me when I'm not using it. So, you know, it works well. It performs a function. I wouldn't have classified or secret conversations on it, but if they want to listen to me talk about my Subaru, all game. Yeah, it's just, I think there's a lot happening with sort of apps and technology that I sort of got thrown into the deep end of the pool on in various ways, sort of watching Russian stuff. But I think there's good reason to be distrustful of apps and programs of certain national origins that we just need to be more aware of, but really we're not.
I'm so grateful you we're going there, because let's zoom out, right? Everybody's talking about swing states right now. They're looking at the ballots being counted and reporting happening. Let's take a step back. I've said many times the Russians didn't meddle in our elections 4 years ago. They attacked them. And unless I'm wrong, they're probably at least trying to attack them right now while we record this conversation. Maybe other enemies of our country, other bad actors, it could even be domestic terrorists, are attacking critical technology infrastructures, critical elements of our society to try to sow discord, create chaos. And I use all the time the hashtag "our enemies are celebrating." But Molly, from where you sit, everybody's glued to cable television. While that's happening, what's happening all around us right now?
Well, I think you're right that there's this sort of matrix of threat actors that are constantly looking for opportunities. And the US is just a really big target. We're the top of the hill, everybody's looking to knock you down, however you want to phrase it. But I think that there's been so much politicization of the topic of Russia and what the Kremlin is doing and what their capabilities are and what happened in 2016 and what's happening now. That gets really frustrating, because I think it's just, most of the time it's so devoid of context, and it has just become this political talking point. But and now, especially because the Trump administration and Republicans in general are really trying to do this. No, but China, like, look over at China and Iran, but China, and it's like, yes, China, but really Russia. And it's just the way that they work has been to be as a disruptor, because it's a huge country territorially and in terms of its military capabilities, but it has a very small economy, and really has to be asymmetric in how it applies sort of its view of power and its ability to move and shape systems. And that's where it's developed this new range of capabilities. I mean, yes, it's things they've done forever, but it's sort of updated, more technological toolkit of political warfare to shape and influence and move the systems around them in ways that are beneficial to their goals. And so I think, there's been so much attempt to dismiss all of this as like something that's not real, or it's like Facebook ads. And it's so much more sophisticated than that. And it's really just sort of the tip of the spear that's like right through the heart of the West. And the Chinese are happy to like float through the space that they make behind them in a much more strategic and sophisticated and nuanced way. But everybody learns from what Russia is doing, including domestic actors who work in the information domain, who are extremely disruptive and manipulative and coercive as well. So it's just like, yes, there's many other things than Russia, but we have to learn from that lesson. And there's so much willingness to just turn away from it and pretend like it didn't happen, that I feel like we just keep going, around and around in these cycles of discussion and not learning the right lessons.
So, Molly, the FBI and CIA issued a warning recently, right? I think in the last week or two, about what's happening, and specifically about an attack on our hospital systems. Can you break that down for us and explain what that warning covered and what's happening?
Sure, absolutely. I think sometimes we really conflate cyber threats with information threats, and these are, yes, they're both electrons, but very separate things. But in the cyber domain, I do think since 2016, there's been a tremendous advancement of US capabilities. They've all sort of been consolidated under Cybercom, and General Nakasone has been like so aggressive in smart, strategic ways about putting those capabilities under one roof and sort of targeting them in the right way. So I think in the cyber domain, there's been much better advancement about what we, the United States, are doing to defend our systems. But actors like Russia, have very heavily focused on hackers as a key strategic capability, because it is so asymmetric. If you have 5 smart guys, you can do a ton of great things in that domain, and not need much more than that. And so they've really developed this sort of hacker culture that it has a lot of mystique around it. Russian hackers are the best hackers. They're, rule breaking and sophisticated and can do anything. It's like magic wizards. But they've sort of totally integrated those capabilities into Russian intelligence. And yes, some of them are still independent, but independent, if it's a unit of Russians operating out of Russia, they're not independent from anything. So there's been a huge focus from the side of Russian actors, Russian cyber actors and hackers, to sort of pre-infiltrate critical infrastructure, government systems, critical systems. And you've seen since 2007, when there was like this first big state-backed cyber attack on Estonia by Russians, really seen them sort of grow and permanently entrench these capabilities. But, looking at power grids, at disrupting water systems, banking systems, and healthcare systems have actually been like a key focus of what they're doing, because of the panic potential of being able to disrupt those things, even for a minute. We talk more about the power grids and the sort of critical infrastructure than we do about things like banking or healthcare. But a couple of years ago, there was a big malware attack developed by the Russians primarily to target Ukraine, but kind of spilled over into everywhere else because it's what malware does. And one of the targets ended up being a hospital system in the United States. And it sort of shut down completely the computer systems and electronic records of this hospital. And, you know, doctors and nurses are not dumb. They can go back to paper, which they were not using too long ago, to run lab results around pretty efficiently. But it does delay the delivery of care, and obviously is very disruptive within a system. And so there was this warning that came out that that this one group of Russian hackers that calls themselves Wizard Spider, because hackers are so mature, was targeting US healthcare systems and sort of building in these malware attacks that could be activated to bring down systems. It seems like there were only a few that actually kind of worked before the warning went out, and they kind of patched the hole that needed to be patched. But it's just a sign that there are these efforts to sort of constantly build in these capabilities to disrupt systems when they want them. And I think it's just something we need to pay more attention to writ large, because those capabilities exist. And when this stuff happens, the goal of them is typically not, you know, to kill zillions of people. It's panic. And until we're aware of what these things are supposed to do, the panic is very real.
I think that's so important for you to focus on. I mean, a lot of folks listening may not even know we have a cyber command, right? Folks who are close to the military know that this has been a priority for the Joint Chiefs. For every defense report, they've been underscoring the importance of cyber, of all things cyber, for really decades now. If you've been watching, it's kind of like climate change. If you pay attention to what the Department of Defense is saying, they're underscoring the incredible importance of this, and they're dedicating resources to it. When you describe these hacker units that are glorified, that are independent, that are asymmetrical, they're kind of like the technology evolution of Al-Qaeda cells, right? Like the Russians are happy to have them all over the place, popping up in mom's basement or in some remote outpost. As long as they're hitting the enemy, they're happy. And the enemy is us in their view, right? So we've got some of these more symmetrical attacks by China and others. And then you've got these multitude of bad actors across the landscape that are trying to sow discord, stress, anxiety, chaos during a pandemic, right? So the worst case scenario is, okay, this small group of Russian renegade hackers takes down a hospital in St. Louis, right? Or in Tulsa during the pandemic, and, chaos, right? They can't find your records. They don't know who got shots. They don't know who's been COVID tested, right? And all that is something our enemies celebrate. But I'm glad you got to one thing that I have to ask you to talk about: Wizard Spider. We can't talk about this technology warfare landscape without recognizing even the general who runs Cyber Command is named what?
Nakasone.
Like General Nakasone sounds like a character from a movie, right?
Totally.
And now we've got Wizard Spider. Tell us, actually, in seriousness, tell us what Wizard Spider is, and what does it represent on the broader landscape?
So, it's an interesting question, because since 2016, we've talked a lot about GRU hacker units. So these are official Russian military intelligence hackers that sort of act as collective units that have a number within the Russian military intelligence structure. But Russia has really played up, in particular since the invasion of Georgia in 2008, this notion of the patriotic hacker, as they call it. So this idea that, independent Russian hackers are so mobilized by their patriotic duties to help the Kremlin that they will take on these activities to bring down the Georgian government's computer system during the war and stuff like that. And I really just want to point out that the patriotic hacker narrative, and I'm sorry to all the journalists who have written about this as if it is real, it's just bullshit. These units are, these groups are, they may be independent, and yes, they're doing other things. But if the FSB or the GRU or someone from the Kremlin shows up and is like, hey, you're going to do this, or I'm going to crush your grandmother, the answer is, okay, I'm going to do the thing. So they're really not independent. There are plenty of, even within the GRU units, and it's something that's so fascinating, is there is this sort of embrace of entrepreneurship and innovation and independence. And even within the operations that are run by these intelligence units, sort of from within the military structures, there's really a focus on like raising money from them, like self-funding additional operations by mining cryptocurrencies or having ads running on the side of your fake websites or whatever it is. But there's like a ton of effort to raise money off of these operations. And I think in that space in particular, these weird independent quote unquote hacker units have been really aggressive. And that's where the malware and ransomware attacks play a key role. But they raise money to run additional operations. And it's just sort of a fascinating model of intelligence work, if you think about it. But so this unit or this group that calls itself Wizard Spider, and there's like subgroups that have other Grim Spider, and whatever the hell else. Hacker groups kind of make up these cute little names for themselves, or they are occasionally applied to them by the different groups that analyze different cyber threats. So I think there's like 3 other names for Wizard Spider, but this is the one that's sort of stuck. But it's the group that has been closely linked to a series of ransomware attacks that have been very successful in building kind of a global network of linked, integrated, malware-infected computers that can be used to do other things. And there's been a lot of focus on it, on this particular network, which is the TrickBot botnet.
I have to stop you there. That was my next question. My next question was, please explain to us what the TrickBot botnet is.
I really wish I could explain it in better terms, but as a non-cyber person, what I would say is, you take this malware, TrickBot malware, and
malware, like for the layman, is an analogy right now, for the sake of maybe a timely one, that malware is like is the coronavirus, right? And
yeah,
like,
absolutely, they want
to spread the coronavirus in as many places as they can. Malware is
right,
the virus, right, or the mechanism
exactly
for spreading the virus.
Exactly. So it targets a specific vulnerability in systems, a security patch you haven't applied, or a weakness in code, to sort of get inside a system, and leaves a little bit of code that then does things. In some cases, it's just to sort of provide that access. In some cases, it collects data and sends it to someone else. In some cases, it's like when you're not using your computer is mining Bitcoin for someone or a different cryptocurrency. Sometimes it's then accessing the networks that you're on to look for other things. There's a lot of things that malware can do, but it's the sort of malicious code that infiltrates your system to do other things. And a specific sort of subcategory of that can piggyback on the malware is what's called ransomware. So this is the kind of nightmarish scenario of a piece of code that kind of gets in, it encrypts everything on your computer and locks you out of your own stuff, and then you have to pay a ransom to get access back to your stuff. And in general, every sort of US security thing is like, don't pay the ransom, just fucking throw that shit out and send it to the Nigerian recycling pile, and buy a new one and suffer the consequences of not having a cloud backup. But originally these things targeted sort of individual computers, right? So it was like a $300 ransom or something, because it was like petty hackers that were doing this stuff. And in the last few years, groups like Wizard Spider have really escalated it toward targeting local governments, law enforcement, which law enforcement that's been targeted doesn't like to talk about, government contractors, sort of bigger targets where there's much more of an incentive to pay large ransoms, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to get access back to their data and their systems. And where there's then these, sort of cascading questions of vulnerability, like what did they get when they hacked this thing? What do they know now that they didn't know before? So it's just sort of a matrix of vulnerabilities. And this huge botnet built by this specific kind of malware, which is more than 1 million computers worldwide, has been sitting out there doing these things since like 2016. And at the beginning of October, Cybercom sort of finally pulled the trigger to disrupt this botnet, and like sort of infected the node computers of the outward computers with a thing that sort of spread the the anti-malware code outward to sort of take it apart for a bit, and they can rebuild it, but it takes time to do that. So it's to sort of cripple this capacity during the month of our election. And sort of parallel to that, there was an effort by Microsoft to gain access to servers through court and through lawsuits and court orders to sort of shut off the servers that were critical to this as well. So it was kind of a really integrated, interesting effort between cybercom and private industry and other things to take down this botnet, because they really believed that this hacker group and this malware and the vulnerabilities it created were somehow going to be linked to disruptions relating to the time of our election, or at least that they had been prepared to do these things just in case.
So that's our landscape.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
if you're driving while you're listening to this, maybe you just pulled over to delete Zoom and everything else off your phone. But this is why we wanted to have this conversation, because people, I think for the most part, are unaware that there's basically an invisible war happening all around them. And they are a player on this battlefield. They want to hit, our hospitals. They want to hit our infrastructures. They want to hit our local election, and they might want to, grab all of your banking info and your codes as well, right? So this is the landscape around us. In that landscape, understanding that we are under attack constantly, Molly, can you frame up where we are right now? Like, what has Trump done wrong or right? And what does our national leadership need to do, like right now? And what do they need to do in the next couple of months? Let's assume Biden gets elected, and he calls you up and says, "Hey, what do we need to do to stop this?" What can you frame that up for us, please?
Sure. I think the biggest increase in vulnerability under President Trump, and there is a lot happening that has nothing to do with him, essentially, that has been positive, right? I mean, our army and armed forces has been forward building capacity in Europe to deal with Russian threats and Russian aggressions in the military domain with our allies and partners in a really small, but a smart, sophisticated way. Like, there's a lot going on around the world to deal with this stuff that we don't really talk about, primarily so the White House doesn't pay attention to it and tell them to stop. But so there has been a lot going on that has been positive, but all of that is sort of inconsequential to the White House. And the constant disruptive effect of this president, who attacks our allies, attacks our alliances, embraces dictators and autocrats in sort of gross and disgusting ways, makes everything this sort of series of transnational interactions that are really just material, and there's always a benefit to sort of him or his image and his family, and not really about national security, but that are just, it's really horrible to watch. And I think there's so many people that will sit there and say, "Oh, well, he's innovative and he's breaking the rules and you just don't like it because he's Donald Trump." And no, and it's just the thing that the United States has always done. And look, we make mistakes, obviously, as a nation. There's bad things in our history that we have somewhat owned or never owned, or talked about or not talked about in terms of what we have done abroad, that are just a part of what we are, and sort of our clumsy efforts to do sometimes some of the things that we really believe in the world. But the United States has always been this umbrella for aspiring democracies, for countries that want to be a part of our alliances, that want to contribute to the international system that keeps us safe, that makes us more prosperous. And yes, we fumble and we stumble and we sometimes look bad, but we have been this umbrella protecting people that want to move that direction. And Donald Trump isn't that, and he doesn't believe in that, and he's very open that he doesn't believe in that. And instead, he's sort of formed these very tactical alliances, but supports disruptive far-right populist parties and leaders in Europe, in Latin America, in the Middle East, but really sort of makes these relationships totally about these personal ties in ways that are just so disruptive and kind of condemn entire categories of people to be thrown into the volcano instead of expanding rights and freedoms around the world, which is what we used to stand for. And I think we in the United States sort of minimize this when we talk about it, because it seems like a stupid thing to talk about when we have all these other things happening at home that we need to be worried about. But for the people in the world that have relied on us to help them in their transitions, the Baltic states, where I spend a lot of time, really relied on American support during Soviet occupation, after they became independent, to build their defense, to not be reinvaded by Russia. All of these things are just so critical to what they've become. And to see what's happening here now is like this horrible, nightmarish scenario for all of them, because without us, and this is not like American exceptionalism in a silly cartoon way. Without us, there is no one in that position of being the umbrella of the free world, in the same way. And there's no one who's going to fill that spot. It's clearly not the EU. It's clearly not Germany. There's nobody else who can kind of sit in that role and be the superpower that backs the alliance of countries that wants to stand for individual rights and freedoms and human rights, and representative government. And without that, in this weird time period of disruptive things, climate change, disruptive technology, a total evolution in how economies and labor and work and money are going to work over the next decades and century. If we are not there sitting in that chair defending these things, they will not survive. It will be these systems of sort of hierarchical delineations, and who gets to be a citizen will be decided by some freaking algorithm somewhere. And it's really dystopian, but it's the truth. And like we just need to look at it more closely and understand that we as Americans, who are so reluctant to be engaged in the world throughout our entire history, we're just sullen and moody about it. We just want to sit at home with our distant oceans, keeping things at bay and focus on ourselves, but that never works out very well. And we just need to embrace the fact that we have this role to play that's so critical. So I didn't really answer the rest of your question.
No, you did. You did. You basically you laid it out, and you basically said Biden should do the opposite of what Trump's doing, which makes sense, right? I mean, the tectonic shift in the strategic positioning of our country. Is the most important thing, right? Like,
absolutely.
Trump's hanging our buddies out to dry. So Georgia, has no assurance that we're gonna help them. And when they see Trump cozying up to Putin, they're rightfully worried that they're going to be hung out to dry, right? And so
look, the message Trump has sent to Europe throughout this entire administration, to NATO, to European countries who aren't in NATO and beyond, has been, make your own deal with Putin because we're not going to fucking be there. And they embrace that. And in many cases, they're super nervous about it. But, some of them are much more forward-leaning about it. But if the answer is you need to make a deal with Putin or you're going to get screwed, they're going to figure out how to make a deal with Putin. But you've seen this shift everywhere in the world. Now when there's shit in the Middle East happening, nobody's like picking up the phone or the WhatsApp to Jared Kushner. They go to Moscow. They fly to Moscow to get these problems solved. And we've just already, during the Obama administration, there was a shift in a lot of these things. And again, we don't talk about it because we're not allowed to criticize Obama because Trump is so awful. But the Obama administration was not a great time period for US foreign policy either. And Trump coming into that space afterward was a fucking disaster. And he has just made all of these things so much worse, and all of these trends of alienating allies and creating fractures and insecurities in our alliances and the things that protect us has accelerated to such a degree that we just don't pay attention to. Now, the good news is part of Joe Biden being very old school is that he gets all of this, right? And he 100% understands the value of American leadership, how we can play a constructive, positive role in the world without having to pour money into, military campaigns everywhere. He gets all of this. And I think when he was in the Senate, spent a lot of his time focused on the Foreign Relations Committee and on things abroad, in helpful and bipartisan and extremely cooperative ways with our allies and others. Yeah. So he knows this. You hear him talk about it. But there's really this pressure from below that is right and left, right? You have the isolationist mindset under President Trump, which is we have absolutely no fucking duty to do anything in the world. We're going to sit at home and worry about our 401ks. And then you have the more left-wing, progressive, kind of Bernie-ish and beyond wing of the party view that we have no right to do anything in the world because we're so broken and fucked up ourselves. And the sort of merger of these things, no duty to do this, no right to do this, is becoming very powerful. And you do have this left-right isolationist mindset that's really creating a lot of pressure from below. And it's already been pushing on Biden and his team to sort of, draw down military spending, draw down our positions overseas, really focus at home. And that's going to be a constant battle, presuming there's a Biden administration. It will be a constant battle to sort of make this case that we have a duty and a right to do these things, but that we need to be engaged to shape the outcome of these tremendously disruptive times that are coming.
That was so important. All of it. That was so important. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have
making me blush.
No, I wanted to have you on my show so that we could talk micro, about like Wizard Spider and the botnet bot thing, and also understand, the strategic framework. And you're pragmatic. You are I would argue, a centrist, right? Like
very much so.
So many people that listen to this show, and me and others that are especially pragmatic about national security and foreign policy, and we feel underrepresented in this discussion right now. And you see Biden being pulled to the left. You've seen Trump pulled way off the table to the right, and the moderate, thoughtful, pragmatic, especially foreign policy and military leaders feel like we've been left out. So there's a hope that with the Biden administration that will be brought back in the fold with a guy who also has experience and trust around the world. People know Joe Biden. His time in foreign policy is so extensive. He's known around the world as a person that you can work with, and that's good for America, in my view. But you also express a righteous anger. This show is about that too, about turning that anger into positive impact. You do that every day, but I want to ask you, the straight up question we ask all our guests. Molly Mckew, what makes you angry?
That's what makes me angry. It's this sullen teenage grumpiness of Americans about having to play a role in the world. And look, there's plenty of things to be angry about. I have a long list. I could just go on and on. But in terms of the thing that motivates me in my adult professional life, this is the thing that makes me angry, is the number of times you have to have this conversation with smart, intelligent, educated, or completely removed from any of the Washington policy discussions that are normally happening worlds. The number of times you have to have discussions with people about why this matters. And I think, a really critical worrying point for me before the 2016 election, and look, a lot of this is like building on this erosion of trust and image that has happened since the Iraq War. And there's plenty of things to get into there that we can dig into forever. But underneath, if you sort of remove the Iraq War from the discussion, there were actually a lot of things the Bush administration did in foreign policy and global engagement that were so smart and tactically strategic in building these relationships. And one of the number one things was just he answered the phone if people called, right? If you were the president of Liberia and you needed something, you could call the White House and get through that day and be like, look, I really need this thing. And he'd be like, we can do that thing, no problem. And we can do this tiny $3 million thing to save your country from collapse, no problem, But he had this sort of very personal engagement with countries that believed in the right stuff, that I think was really missing during the Obama administration, which had a greater distance of personal relationships between the president and others. And we can really rebuild some of that, I think. But we haven't dealt with this post-Iraq War malaise that has polluted everything about how we think about the world and our role in it. And we just need to stop. We just need to snap out of this crap. Yes, the Iraq War, so many things to say there. But the fundamental idea that some of us that supported the Iraq War when it was happening believed in, which was Iraqis deserved better, and they deserved not to have this horrible, murderous, torturous dictator in charge of them and their country, was still right. And I think part of the anti-Iraq War backlash has been this bigoted, terrible baseline wisdom that has emerged in the United States of, these Arabs just aren't ready for democracy, and there's whole countries and parts of the world that can't have what we have, and it's best if we stop trying to expand these things and just retreat to our current NATO unit and sit at home and smoke a pipe or whatever. But this is not correct and so fundamentally wrong. This idea that people don't want what we have. People do want what we have. And as much as you want to say about what Bush screwed up, and there's a long list and it can go on and on, his second inaugural address, which was about the fact that people want freedom, was not wrong. And you had the Arab Spring and nobody showed up for it. And those people are all fucking in prison or dead. And we just let these things fall. And then you have Syria and the expansion of badness. And I mean, these things have consequences, and we need to look back at them out from outside of our American lens of terribleness of our own behavior, and really look at the other pieces that sort of float around these edges. And this time period where we've sort of stepped back, and not great countries like Russia and China have stepped up into that void to shape the system that's going to emerge in the coming decades. And we need to be there. And I think Biden gets that, but I think Americans need to get that. And we need better leadership that will convince Americans of that in the way that Donald Trump convinced people that this is a disaster for us.
So important. That Professor Molly Mckew, ladies. No, really, I mean it, man. That's the good stuff.
I'm angry.
That's what people need to hear right now, especially, right? Because I've been angry about the fact that foreign policy basically hasn't registered on this entire discussion for the last 4 years. And in my view, the stakes are always highest when it comes to foreign policy. If you don't believe me, think about nukes.
Absolutely.
Right? Like this is potentially a lame duck president that could have access to nukes, who may be emotionally unstable, who might be on fucking steroids. I mean, this guy, is in a very, very powerful position. And the power is what I think is lost on people because they don't feel it, because it feels far away. Their kids might not be in Afghanistan. They might not have traveled overseas, or they might have just forgotten about it because grandma's got coronavirus, right? So bringing it back home is what needs to happen right now. And I hope that Joe Biden will do that. In the meantime, you have done it. So let me ask you to take it back home one step further,
sure.
Right? They say all politics is local. And what we need to do is bring this foreign policy and cyber attack malware discussion back to human beings watching and listening. So you posted a great piece last week about basically reading before you retweet. Don't help the enemies. Don't pass on misinformation. Don't do what Trump does on some level when he retweets, QAnon shit. But can you, for folks who are listening who say, what can I do? I want to be a citizen to help, stop the Russians from attacking and disrupting America and taking down our healthcare grid and sowing discord in America. What can people listening now do in their sphere of influence, Molly?
So if you don't want to do anything else and you think it's too complicated to learn more, just don't do anything on social media and you'll be helping, right? You can read stuff, but don't touch any of it. And that will help. I think, there's still this, everybody believes the stupid of the other side is more stupid than they're stupid, but there's plenty of stupid on all sides on social media and the internet that targets all of us. And I think in the post-2016 environment in particular, there's been so much focus because it's so overt and the president constantly promotes it. And it's like the flags are all over. There's been so much focus on the disinformation, conspiracies, and nonsense that have come from sort of right-wing media, right-wing personalities on social media, the way that they have used social media to sort of assemble these things together and really mindfuck people, that we've not talked enough about the fact that this is very much also something that targets everyone else, including the left. Before there was this embrace of how to target conservatives, the Kremlin had a much better read on how to infiltrate and target progressives and left-wing groups for a long time. I mean, this was always their soft target, was like these haters of America, as they would call them. But the sort of fringe groups that are really on the outside, they're anti-system, whatever they are. And, in the US, this is very much a left-right, right-left thing, right? You have anti-government groups like where I grew up in Idaho, where northern Idaho doesn't really want the government to exist. So you have these sort of right-wing groups that have always been a part of this mindset, but you also have left-wing groups that think exactly the same thing. There shouldn't be government, that like we should all be a happy utopian, camp or something. And that is a totally exploitable mindset. So I think what targets these, what targets all of us, no matter what is going on. And look, we've all of us, this lady included, fallen for an amplified, disruptive, crazy disinformation or malign information on social media. What targets all of us is that emotion. It's that raw emotion of either fear or outrage or anger. So you just like hit the button real quick without understanding the key things, which is always, it's not always even, is this true? It's, what is this thing in front of me and why am I looking at it right now? It's like, what is the purpose of this thing? And we always need to ask that question. What is the purpose of this information and what does it want me to do? And if you understand that like the goal is just to make us all look bad, or the goal is to make America look weak and divided, maybe you just leave it alone. And that's not to say that these things aren't true. It's not to say that some horrible episode of police violence didn't just occur. But if it's being pushed by RT, the Russian state media, maybe just leave it alone. Maybe don't retweet that, you know? And I think we just need to be more aware of how information is being used, not just to shape how we view ourselves and our nation, but to change our behavior. And it's worked. It's fairly effective, and it's really influencing all of us. And I think there's no greater proof to that than the current election results that we see in the presidential election, where in counties that Donald Trump won, he's expanded his majority that he won in 2016. He's really expanded his majority for the most part in 2020. And that number seems to be the greatest in counties where the most people have died of COVID, which is like, but it's the same on the other side, where Democratic counties have become more Democratic because we're all just siloing further and further apart, and we have totally separate realities of information. One of my oldest friends, who is, really one of the people I've known the longest since I've been a grown-up, who's a dear friend who I adore, and he's one of those people that if like shit hit the fan and I needed something, he would do it no matter what. But he's a Marine. He's a really great person, but he is 100% down the rabbit hole of Trumpism, and like purposefully baits me a lot of the time with stupid text messages, I think. But it's like, the other day it was like, hey, has anybody debunked this theory, the conspiracy theory that bin Laden's not dead and is living in Iran, and Obama made a deal with the Iranians to like hide bin Laden in Iran, and then killed all these SEALs to like hide that he didn't kill bin Laden. And I was like, do not fucking ask me that question. He was like, why are you mad? I'm just asking a question. And it's like, no, you're not.
But you're spreading the virus. You're doing the enemy's work for them. You're spreading the misinformation, and using the coronavirus, I think, as an analogy is really powerful right now, right? Like if you don't know what you're sharing, you may be sharing something damaging, right? Even if it's in a text, right? And that's such a powerful point that people need to consider. And controlling your emotion is so hard right now, and it's hardest of all for our president. And I think the way you framed it, Molly, is so important. I've been trying to teach my kids, and one of the things we do that's an exercise is I don't like commercials. I feel like commercials are misinformation. They're programming you. And when we're watching live sports or news, commercials will come on. And I do a thing with my son where I say, okay, Rye, what are they selling you? And he'll say phones, or he'll say cars, or he'll say, a beach. And no, it's not a beach. It's, it's Viagra, right? It's like, but watching him go through this thought process, right? I mean, the pharmaceutical ads are the craziest ones, right?
They're the craziest ads.
Look at it through the eyes of a 5-year-old. But they're playing on our emotion, and that control of our emotion and staying vigilant. We say a lot of the show is probably the most important thing we can do as Americans right now. But I'm so glad we had this conversation. You need your own podcast. Maybe we can talk about that afterward. But you also bring positivity. You're bringing light to the heat, and that's something else each of us can do is share information and share good voices. You're one of the voices that I wanted to share with people who don't know about you. But you do bring some positivity, and this show is about positivity as well. So, Molly Mckew, what makes you happy?
Ooh, that's hard these days. Getting out in the world makes me happy. Learning more about places that aren't here make me happy, because I bring home better information and better stories and better advice than you would get anywhere else. And I know we as Americans tend to think the opposite, that like we have things to teach everyone else and there's nothing for us to learn. But working these last 15 years in newly emerging, as we sometimes call them, democracies like Georgia and Estonia and Lithuania, but countries that have really had to think about, in the immediate post-Soviet period, okay, there's nothing. How do we build a system that works effectively for democracy? They've really brought a lot of innovation to this question of the relationship between government and people, that I think we are really, really, really behind on, especially using technology as a better and more effective means of engaging the electorate. I just think there's a lot that can be done in that space. So, what makes me happy is not having to sit in this box in Washington, D.C. and stare at everything through screens and phones and like have multiple phones pinging at the same time. But what makes me happy is that, what I've learned in all the places that I've worked, which look, I've worked in these places in bad time periods where the Kremlin is advancing, where democracy is in decline or under siege in many respects, where the good guys are losing, where the bad guys win and like wallow in their tubs of illicit cash every night, including in the United States. But what makes me happy is that the people that you meet everywhere are this fabric of, oh, fuck no, we're not letting this win. And I think we really just need to remember that there is this positive energy everywhere that is rooting for America. And like, we always view it as the other way, like it's our job to like, push the Liberians and the Estonians and the Georgians for democracy. But all those people are rooting for us because we're what they have in terms of the guarantee on their own futures, and the system that they believe in and the ideals and values that they believe in. And if we can maybe understand that and embrace that a little bit more, then we will all have the happy, fun stories that really buoy me in dark times. But I'll offer one as a things can work better, because this one's really amazing. The Georgian government under President Saakashvili, so after the Rose Revolution, one of the famed color revolutions that Tucker Carlson wants you to believe are bad, just like the Kremlin does, that their thing was essentially, we've inherited a failed state. How do we transform it immediately to show our people that this is different and new and better? And they really embraced this idea of a very streamlined process of citizen interaction with government. So no more paying bribes to get your driver's license or your business license. It was like one open, transparent system to do things. And they really took it to these heights that like we as Americans it's like our jaws drop when we see it. But one time I was meeting in the giant public service hall, which is this place where all of these transactions now happen. I met, when my guys were still in government, one of my guys in this cafe, and I don't know why he wanted to meet in this public service hall, right? But in this very nice cafe, I was sitting and having a coffee, and he comes and sits down, and we're having a coffee. And this lady rolls up with a little computer tray table thing and sits down at the end of the table. And I'm like, what's this lady doing over here? And he's like, oh, I just need to renew my passport. So while we're sitting and having this coffee, because he's already made this appointment with the cafe people, the lady with the cafe table is like typing his information from his old passport into the computer and prints out the thing and hands it to him, and he signs it. And then she like, has a thing and like rolls the backdrop behind his head and takes his photo like at the cafe table for his passport. And then he like, yeah, that picture's good. And then she rolls away, and then the bill for his passport renewal comes on our coffee tab. And I'm like,
whoa.
I'm like, the last time I had to get a passport, I had to pay some like ridiculous service to do it, in an expedited way, like hundreds of dollars, because it's such a fucking hassle. And so I just think there's lessons that we tend to think America can't do it this way because we've always done it this other way. And really that's just dumb. And we need to get over the sort of corrupt internal deal making that every county official has everywhere. Like, no, we can't change this because my cousin Ed has run the system forever. Like, no, like we need a totally streamlined way of how government interacts with our lives. From the bottom up, it is this streamlining of process of like making government something that's more efficient and effective for us. And from the top down, it's really this transformation of what is democracy delivering to us now? Because it's different than it was in 1920. And what is that role now? And I think we've seen some really innovative thinking coming primarily from the Democratic side in the last campaign cycle. But I think we all need to embrace that and just sort of have these radical seeming discussions about how we transform the way government works for people.
On that note, a new President Biden would be smart to bring you into government to help him figure this shit out.
I'm too controversial.
Yeah, well, get in line. There's a lot of us that are controversial out there. And if that's a barrier to us working together, then we're really fucked. But right. But I think that, look, Molly, you are you're like a superhero from Ready Player One. It's like you've got all these elements and this mystery and this power that you're.
But do I get a helmet? I want a helmet.
I'll get you a helmet, but I'll get you a helmet, and you have the samurai sword. We got to get like Mike Shinoda to do like a superhero like doll of you or something. But in the meantime, first off, you're bringing us what we need right now. This conversation is bringing us what we need. It's the hard truth. It's the information people don't know about. It's an eye toward the future. And that's why I was so excited to have this conversation. I think it's one that's going to be durable. People can listen to this 6 months from now and still get a lot out of it. And I can't get you a helmet, but I do have gifts. So first off, I've got an Angry Americans shirt for you. Coming
My nephew will love that.
Super comfy. I'm also rocking one. If you're watching our YouTube page, this is the Angry shirt. Big shout out to everybody who voted wearing one of these. Got a lot of really cool photos from our listeners who are rocking these at the polls. We got more stuff coming, but that's at angryamericans.us, and Molly will get you a couple of those. And then you will be getting some Uncle Nearest whiskey. It's not Jameson's, but you add it to your collection. This is my bottle that folks who are really paying attention will notice continues to get less full.
Smaller and smaller and smaller.
I did do Sobertober, so for a long time it didn't move.
What?
But it's yeah, right? That was.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
7 weeks, I didn't touch a drop. So
don't stop drinking. That's the wrong year to stop drinking. What are you thinking?
I support everyone in whatever way they want to approach this. I tried it in part because I wanted to do it, say I did it, and I did it. But I'm not posting my way.
The big mug is coffee, but the small mug isn't.
See? There you go. All right. Well, something you can add to your coffee and whiskey. This is the Rorschach test question of our show. Peeps. I don't know if you could get these in the Soviet Union or Georgia. Maybe what people have to live on for periods of time. But as is always the question on this show, Molly Mckew, if you had to choose one color, blue, pink, or yellow, which one would you choose and why?
I would go with original yellow because they're nostalgic. And I don't know if you saw, but I recently posted I have a pack of, because they're not making special Peeps this year because there's like a crisis of peepdom in these times.
It's been a big discussion in our community. That's not misinformation. That's real.
It's terrible. It really is. But last year when I was buying Halloween candy, I got a pack of the ghost Peeps for Halloween for my brother-in-law because he's obsessed with Peeps. And like, okay, whatever. It's his favorite thing, which I find weird, but they're good. Okay, whatever. But I got them and then, of course, shoved them in a cabinet and totally forgot they were there and never gave them to him. And when I was cleaning out my pantry like 2 weeks ago, I found them and I was like, ooh, I bet those are, but they're still soft. And I checked the date and it's like, they don't expire for another 9 months. Like, we're good to go. We can eat these Peeps. But if you never saw, I hope it's still on the internet somewhere, there was like a Peep experimentation website. Did you ever see this?
No.
Before Peeps changed to the painted on eyeballs, they had like a hard eyeball. And there was a whole website about how literally no substance known to man, including like sulfuric acid, would dissolve whatever the eyeballs were. It's genius. You can read it for hours and hours and just piss yourself laughing. But
this is gonna quickly devolve into QAnon conspiracy that will be perpetuated by the GRU.
The Peeps are the RFID tag.
See what I mean? Don't say that shit.
It's not true. There's no RFID tags in Peeps.
True, right?
No
not
Peeps.
True. Okay. Well, look, you have brought so much truth. You brought so much perspective. I've loved having you on the show. This is the Master Chief helmet. I will. I can't get you this one because it's the only one.
It's okay. You don't need to get me that one.
But you can borrow it when you need it. Mckew, you are a real voice of reason. You're an incredible patriot, and you're a global citizen. You're really helping so many people around the world with your information and your power and your dynamism. I'm so grateful that you joined us at this important time. Thank you so much for joining me and for all that you do.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Enjoy the samurai sword, the ghost Peeps, and stay vigilant, especially online, and stay frosty.
Thanks.